character, their well-being, their learning. And we felt as a group that a key part of our work as leaders is to understand what pupils and young people think. You know, it's not about what they think about the latest gizmo or gadget, or what do they think about EastEnders. It's about what they think about themselves as learners and how they see themselves as learners in the GFM. And we had, next slide please, we had some key questions that were sitting underneath our thinking as a group of leaders. First of all, do we know what learners really think? Do we spend time as education professionals getting alongside learners, spending that valuable time with them, understanding and hearing their voice? And why is this important for us as teachers and educators? Why should it be that we want to hear what the young people in our care have to say? And that was a key question driving our thinking about this group. How can it help us as professionals in terms of the education we provide? You know, if we give our learners the time that they need to tell us how they feel about their learning, then surely we can improve the quality of our provision and give them exactly what they need. And finally, what areas of our learners' experience should we find out about? You know, what is it about the learner's experience that we should focus on? So in this presentation today, we've got two halves of a learner-centred approach to evaluating school effectiveness. As I said, we have devised some questions to ask pupils on well-being, character and their learning, and these lead to case studies which we've written up as leaders, and they'll be made available on the GFM Talks website. And the second half of our presentation today is the work of the Student Evaluative Enquiry Team, led by Adderley, in which pupils were involved in understanding the Ofsted framework, capturing digital evidence in their travels around school and during lessons, and writing evaluative statements about how they feel about their learning and how well they're progressing as young people. And our focus for the Student Evaluative Enquiry Team for the young people was focusing on personal development, behaviour and attitudes. I'm going to hand over now to Chris Willis.
Well, thank you, Geoff, and good afternoon, everybody. We conducted the learner evaluations throughout the last academic year, particularly towards the summer term. And what was fantastic during that period was the way in which we were able to collect some of that data. We, as you know, were using online tools more than ever, and therefore we're able to get some really good enriching data from some of that interaction. We collected data for the case studies in three ways. One way was through online surveys, so using Google Forms with a number of students in various different groups that we're going to be talking about in a little while. From focus groups, so some of those students that were attending site for the critical worker provision were interviewed, both here but also at Broome Park, but also down in Spring Garden Lane and online too. And finally, through semi-structured interviews, and many of those again took place during that period of closure, both online and face-to-face. We compiled that data together through a number of different ways, but we have created a series of case studies that will be shared with you later this afternoon following this GFM Talks. And we'd urge you to have a read of those to really find out what those findings were. We're going to touch upon some of that in a moment, but some really interesting stuff has come out of those, which we hope to take forward in our journey moving forward this academic year. I'm now going to hand over to Deanne Coombs, who's going to be talking about our learner evaluations, specifically those for SEND students. Thank you.
Hello. For those of you who don't know me, as Chris said, my name's Deanne Coombs, and I'm the secondary lead for SEND. And my focus was looking at children who have an EHCP. I worked with 5 children. They had a mixed profile of need. different levels of confidence, different levels of need, different levels of attainment. And I was really encouraged in terms of hearing some of their answers back. The main message that I heard, which was huge for me, is that emotionally, over that time of lockdown, they were well, and that experience of lockdown was not as negative as I feared it would be. The press talked a lot about how damaged this cohort would be emotionally, and I worried for them, but actually that I got very positive feedback from them. They talked about the experience of lockdown and being able to learn at their own pace. They talked about being comfortable with the level of challenge, but more importantly, they talked about the quality of the support that they received during that time. And I've been very reflective about how we continue to grow that relationship between key worker and child. The key workers over the course of the lockdown made regular contact both with the children and with their families. They coached both children and families in the use of their Chromebooks. And with the youngsters in particular, they had a shared document that was focused on the targets. And it was a shared document where people could give feedback. Again, the children really appreciated that instant feedback. And what I heard the children communicate back to me is that because of that level of support, they were able to grow their independence. They became much more confident in their use of the Chromebook. They learned to do things for themselves. One child talked about the reading of things on the screen because he didn't have somebody to read to him. He could read that himself. That growing of independence, and also that self-management of need, that building into their day their own rest breaks rather than being told what to do. So I'm very thoughtful about where we move forward with this. We're struggling to know how to support our children in lessons with the social distance regulations. But this idea of using the technology, the Chromebooks, teaching young people to be very independent in the use of accessibility features, of having shared documents to communicate between adults and themselves, being able to use that resource and have a wealth of resources at their fingertips is going to be huge for them moving forward into the future. So those are things that we're going to be working on. And as I said earlier, there's something about the quality of the relationships, because these youngsters do have identified needs, and the support they got from the adults was really very much valued. It's something that we need to grow, and they constantly need that encouragement and that coaching through some of the challenges that they're going to have. But I think I learned that they could do more than I thought they could. I think they learned that they could do more than they thought they could do as well, which was really huge for me. I'm going to pass on to Kerry and Georgina, who will give you their reflections on the primary phase.
I'm Georgina Mulhall, and I'm the Executive Head for the primary phase of the GFM.
Hi, I'm Kerry, Payne, the Head Teacher of Foundry Junior School and the Inclusion Leader across the Trust. I guess we were reflecting on our learner evaluation studies and appreciated how lucky we were that towards that latter part of the summer term we had our pupils on site with us, and that gave us the opportunity to operate semi-structured interviews for children in both Year 5 and Year 6, and that then led us to speak with over 30 children. That was through a very holistic approach with us sitting, talking, recording their responses. And actually what was really lovely was that one child reported to me just how lovely it was to sit and have a chat, not just about their learning, and that was one aspect, but just about them and their experiences.
I think we certainly found that they were really keen to discuss
They
and
were.
share their experiences. And in fact, I think those first couple of days when they returned to us, they wanted to do nothing but talk
A lot
to us and to each other. And I think actually the children demonstrated a real openness for sharing, but actually having different viewpoints and being comfortable and happy to sharing and to listening to one another. I think they felt really heard, didn't they? Which was really important. When the primary phase went into lockdown, we were very keen to equip our children with tools that were familiar to them. So they all went home with a work pack that they got stuck into, but we realised that wasn't sustainable.
No.
So we quickly had to move to learning online. And Goma had been using Google Classroom for several months ahead of lockdown and ran and worked really swiftly to develop that online offer. And we recognised that the landscape was slightly different within our communities. We recognised there was a little bit of a tech barrier, but we worked really hard to try and address those barriers and then to create a cohesive offer across the phase. And I think we were really keen, weren't we, Kerry, to ensure that our intention and impact was going to be the same, but our implementation was a little bit different.
Yeah.
And I think actually I'm reflecting on that, by enabling our teachers to develop that offer, reflected their personalities, which we then realised was really important to the children, because it then enabled them to feel closer to the school, which at that time they were missing, weren't they? One of the quotes that struck me was a child reported that my parents tried, but they weren't great teachers. And they recognised very swiftly how closely they work and how much they appreciated learning with their teacher. And I was really pleased at how the children embraced learning online. And I think actually by talking to the children when they returned, whilst we recognised there were really sound relationships, the children were able to reflect on how important their pupil-teacher relationship was, and how that moulded their learning, gave them a forum to talk and develop so much. I think they articulated that really well.
They did. They talked a lot about missing their teacher. They did mention friends, but actually for them it was the adults that they work with, and that reinforcement of always sort of that positivity that they get from the adults, and that was the bit that they really wanted to get back to.
I think whilst they liked their work pack, they recognised that being able to have that face-to-face contact with their teachers enabled them to get that feedback that enabled them to move on in their learning.
Absolutely.
That's something they thought was really important. And I think focusing on those relationships, we also recognised, or we were aware that children may be returning feeling a little bit anxious and nervous. And I think one of my favourite quotes to show how important those relationships are was a child who had said, I was worried I would forget what to do or what it would be like to be back at school, but as soon as I saw Mrs A, she smiled and spoke to me, and I knew it would all be okay. And I think that then supports the value we have in that face-to-face, be it on site or with the blended model of being able to learn online also. I think that time also of hearing from the children enabled us to really consider our school improvement approach.
Absolutely.
We'd already established that we needed to explore, restore, and what that would look like. But I think the children were really clear, weren't they, about where they felt there were gaps in their learning. They talked a lot about the fact they felt they'd been hindered perhaps because they didn't have transition in its regular form, and how that they'd identified actually some of what they wanted to do and how to do it. And I think it was important that we listened to that to then mould what our curriculum looked like in September. And I think it's really hard for us sometimes with a really dense curriculum to remember that actually often less is more.
Forward with Impact Ed, and that was used to gather that information about all those learners, their feelings, their views, and those 4 key areas. And I think that's then led us to make those really informed decisions about the curriculum adjustment. And that's quite challenging, isn't it? Because we want to improve our schools, give the breadth, give this amazing offer, and actually we've had to really sit and say what's important. And we started with well-being and making sure those core skills were in place before we moved on. And as you've mentioned, COVID premium's being used to supplement that, but we've also got that really rigorous approach to that classroom practice now, being centred on those real core fundamentals that allows everybody to sort of flourish and make progress.
We talk all the time about the importance of brave honesty between ourselves and our colleagues, and I'd say that actually the children had that in bucketfuls.
Oh, wow.
And they were quite clear about how they feel they learn best and what worked well for them at home. And actually some of our children thrived.
They did.
Others struggled.
Yeah.
But I think the key, the link between all of the children was the relationships they have with the staff, and how the varied offer enabled the children to feel engaged with their learning and connected also. And as you say, I think the Impact Ed findings has formalised some of that. But I think the case studies, the Impact Ed, our evaluation of our curriculum so far, that triangulation has shown that we really have had a pupil voice to organise the things that we have in place. the children had lots to say, didn't they?
They did have a huge amount to say, and actually I guess that's where our positive relationships came into play, because they weren't afraid to tell us things that they knew we probably didn't want to hear. And on speaking to Year 6, what was really, it was a really funny experience, because I had assumed they'd be really pleased that they weren't doing SATs, that actually that was a sort of a stress or a tension that could be taken away. And actually, so a couple of our children, they were seeing they were lacking in motivation, so I don't see the point, now we're not going to do our SATs, why should I do this learning? And also, and my favourite one was, I just really wanted to do my SATs to show what I had learned, and I think it was important for us then, it led us to reflect as a team that we needed to offer those opportunities to celebrate the progress we had made, and to ensure they did, all those children did leave us knowing what they had achieved in their time with us, and really focus on that pivotal moment of Year 6 to Year 7 transition.
Absolutely, and we know that transition is really important at any stage of a child's school career, but the Year 5s and Year 6s talked about that a lot. And I think interestingly, some of the Year 5s felt they wanted to return as Year 5s, have that transition experience as they would normally, to then move into Year 6. And I think whilst I think the children identified that they had a transition offer, they recognised that the links with school enhanced that. But I think we have taken our learning, we've taken so much learning from that time, and I think the children really feel that they have been heard. I think they have a really sound basis for our evaluations.
Yes, which we will now carry on with.
Absolutely. So it is with pleasure that I hand back to Chris, who will talk around his case studies for the secondary phase.
Thank you, ladies. Yes, and unfortunately Ryan Peet was going to be here this evening, but is unable to make it. So his case study will be available, as I said, after this evening's GFM talks, for you to have a good read through to see where we identify, particularly with those students that were part of the critical worker provision during lockdown, and through some of that student voice work that was taking place at that time as well. So I'd encourage you to have a closer look at that. I'm going to be talking and focusing specifically on some of the work that went on with our service children, our service community across the secondary phase during that period of extended school closure. As you will know, we have a large number of service children in our organisation. In fact, we have nearly 500 service children across the GFM. And in the secondary phase, we've got several hundred absolutely within just the two secondaries. We decided that during that period, we wanted to focus specifically on those service children that had particularly been hard to reach, that were struggling with motivation. You'll know that the service premium specifically is designed to support learners with their well-being, their motivation, their engagement, and so it was a really good opportunity to engage with those targeted learners and use our new Spring Garden Lane site to work with those learners in a very safe way down on Spring Garden Lane. And I'm very grateful to Mark Masters and the team down the road who were able to provide some tuition during that period for those learners, particularly around that well-being strand, around the engagement with the online learning, and supported by our Gosport school pastors and Charlie Clark, our Elsa, who were able to really focus on that resilience and core skills in engaging those service children with keeping going in their motivation. And as I said, there was a real focus on that engagement and well-being during that period. During that time, we carried out the learner evaluation, and Mark Masters and his team were very good at inquiring with those students about what was working, reviewing the impact of what was going on. What was fantastic during that time as well is the engagement we had with parents, and so the triangulation between home school was excellent, and therefore being able to drive some of that engagement in a way that we don't often see on a day-to-day in the mainstream. So it was really positive to see some of that impact. And some of that was that it was just hugely positive for those learners to feel that support where mum or dad may have been on deployment or lockdown and intensified with the lockdown. They were able to have that time, that consistency where they were coming into school just for 3 days during the weeks where they were able to work specifically with a tutor and have that support and well-being delivered by the ELSA and the school pastors, and that had a real impact on the drive. We, as I said, focused particularly on those service children who were harder to reach, so those that had been made clear through a number of surveys that we'd carried out, and through our data pool that we were analysing prior to lockdown. We were able to target those specifically. And as I said, it was really very much focusing on their development, their engagement. What was really positive was the feedback that we had from the students in regards to the way it made them feel connected to school during a time, and similar to what George and Kerry were just talking about with the primary phase, where they, like many, were feeling completely disconnected from mainstream, from school, and were really struggling, as we all do, on online meetings. So I very much appreciate your attendance today. When we have that time constantly throughout the day, some of those service children were really struggling in engaging and keeping that sustained engagement through the whole school day. And so what was really positive about that was being able to break that up with that support. And so, as I said, some of the findings from that were really positive around their being able to have that time, that support, that guidance, that nurturing nudge from the team down the road, that meant that actually the progress they were able to make was really significant. And that of the parents as well. So the parents were absolutely impressed by what was being delivered and what was being offered. They were delighted to see how their children were making that progress whilst during that period of school closure, and therefore actually are very keen on looking at how we as an organisation may facilitate that moving forward. And so working again with the Spring Garden Lane team in how we develop a blended learning approach for those students that actually really do want to learn with the online platform in a way that really enriches and makes progress. I mean, wasn't it fantastic to see that although there were some real struggles during lockdown with online learning, actually there was also some fantastic developments, and some students really stepped up and raised the bar and really made excellent progress in learning online. And so it's those children that we want to work with and develop further in how we might offer that provision of blended learning in a way that suits them moving forward. And so the learning that came from us as an organisation was what we might do to take that to the next level. And as I said, parents of those students that were targeted have been incredibly supportive about what they feel was incredibly beneficial to their child. So, as I said, I would encourage you to have a look through the report. I'm really grateful to Mark Masters, really grateful to Charlie Clark for helping to pull that together during the lockdown. And do have a look about some of those findings. Some of the student voice that comes out of those case studies as well is really interesting. And they will be, as I said, shared following today's talks. I'm now going to be handing over to Luke Adderley, who's going to be talking to you a little bit more about our student evaluation team. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name's Luke Adderley and welcome to part 2, this time focused on the SEEK group. That's the Student Evaluative and Enquiry Group. We really value the input of our learners and we've consulted them lots in the past, but last year we tried something a little bit new, a slightly different research method and looking to give some different outcomes perhaps. But rather than me explaining too much, I'm just going to start by showing a short clip from a presentation which the pupils gave to the CEO right at the very end of the last academic year. It gives a little bit of detail about what SEEK is, how it was formed, and gives a flavour of what they were doing in their first project.
SEEK, or Student Evaluative Enquiry Team, was set up by Mr. Willis and Mr. Adderley. They then enlisted the help of some Year 8 and 9 pupil voice students. They set the students off on a challenge to look at Bay House in terms of personal development through their opinions. What we do. We were tasked with going around the school and taking photos of what we think is good and what we think needs improving about school, then making a presentation showing our findings.
During our first meeting, we met Mr. Walls and Mr. Adderley, and they told us that we had been selected to be part of the SEEK team. We have been learning all of the importance of SEEK and that our opinions are valued. We have limited our area to focus to personal development so we can really study the improvements needed. The initial meeting was crucial to our understanding of the project because we learned a great deal about our area of focus. We also discussed the roles and responsibilities, Google Drive setup, discussed the ethical things, and studied the pairs.
During the project, we used multiple different softwares to share our findings for this presentation, such as Google Drive, Google Slides, and our phones. We used Google programs as it let us and others in our team see our findings. This was beneficial as it meant we didn't have to print off 72 pictures separately. Using the Google Suite meant we could all work on the same project at the same time. Also, uploading photos was easy for everyone.
There was a lot to consider to ensure that we behaved in a way that wouldn't upset anyone, so we did the following. We discussed on how to run this project without causing problems for staff and students. We wore lanyards whenever we took our photos. And during our sessions, we talked about asking pupils and staff their permission before taking any photos or videos.
This area of focus is based around spiritual, moral, social and cultural development. Examples of this can range from learning about other cultures to whole class work. Geography work, overall I think it's very good because we are given opportunities to develop in a range of different ways for our lessons. The one way I think it could be improved is allowing pupils to work in groups that will really benefit them.
Hopefully that gave a really good flavour, and it was great for me just listening back and reflecting on the process that the pupils really engaged in, but also the outcomes. And at the end there, you just heard Hannah, who was just beginning to talk through and give you a bit of a flavour of each of the areas of the Ofsted criteria, sort of the range of evidence that she'd gathered, and then how as a group they began to moderate that evidence and try and draw a conclusion. And then importantly, as she points out, to try and highlight areas where we think actually we really could improve in this area, and that the pupils were able to highlight that really clearly, both to the group and as part of that presentation. In the second sort of round that they looked at, using a different research method, this time they looked at behaviour and attitudes, and again using the Ofsted criteria, the pupils were tasked with trying to come to similar conclusions and to find evidence to suggest what level and what areas they thought could be improved within their school. Hopefully you'll be able to see there's a coloured green and red slide at the moment, which gives you the opportunity to see that they said that some of the areas they thought were really good, some of the areas perhaps required improvement. It was really, really enriching to read the comments that go alongside that, which actually say why they think that, what evidence they found to support their conclusions, and also to highlight to us areas where perhaps we definitely would like to improve. I also just wanted to share this photo with you. It's from one of the Year 9 pupils when we were looking at the Ofsted criteria. And it really made me think about how sometimes when we're faced with a list of criteria, whether that be for Ofsted or any number of other criteria, that we can have worries or fears about getting really stuck in and trying to understand it. But with some scaffolding, it was an amazing activity to work with the pupils and to look about how we could really highlight, to begin to get into detail about what examples could we be looking for, what does each line mean, what is it that we're trying to find evidence to prove. And I wonder if within our own teams we might benefit from doing a similar task, whether that be getting to grips with perhaps a new risk assessment, an auditing tool to evaluate our process, or like these learners, the Ofsted criteria themselves. So what's next for the group? Well, we want to use the information that SEET have given us to inform the decision making. For example, when they highlighted that they felt careers information was hard to find, we launched a new website, making it much easier for pupils and parents and anyone else to find more information about careers. But we also now want to begin to look at quality of education and using different research methods to evaluate our offering. Equally, working with a wider range of pupils, hopefully soon at Broome Park, but also at Bay House 2 and other schools, where we can have a different lens that we can look through various parts of school improvement. I'm now going to hand back to Geoff. Thanks.
Well, thank you to the team today for giving us a real flavour of what it was like to get into discussions and work with young people to really reveal what it is that they think. You know, but if it just stops there and our work is just about listening to what pupils have to say, that's not enough. It needs to make us as educationists think about our practice and change the way we do things. And I think what was particularly encouraging about the second half, looking at the Student Evaluative Enquiry Team, is the fact that what they have said and their findings against the Ofsted framework are starting to influence how we plan, do things and make changes in the GFM that really will benefit pupils. You know, if they have their voice listened to, it means that there is great power in that learner voice. If we take action as a result of what they think and what they say, then we are making great strides as a learning organisation. You know, it's great that learners' well-being, character and learning are starting to be put at the heart of our self-evaluation. How we judge ourselves needs to link so clearly to what pupils experience and what they say they experience in their time with us. The next steps in the use of case studies, well, we want to develop further case studies and build up a real strong evidence base that helps us be research-led professionals that make decisions on the basis of sound evidence and the input of young people. The next steps, as Luke has said, for the Student Evaluative Enquiry Team, well, who knows how far it will go. I would love every single pupil in the GFM to have their voice heard in the way that we've described to you in this GFM talk today, because every single one of those voices counts and matters, and we don't want a single child to be left out. So in summary, I would just encourage you, wherever you are, whatever your situation, whatever your engagement with education at the moment, I would encourage you to take encouragement yourselves from this notion that learner voice can be a powerful tool to help us improve, to achieve more, be greater and aspire further. I'm going to hand back to David now, who's going to conclude our session.
Thank you, Geoff, and also thank you to Luke Adderley, Georgina Mulhall, Kerry Payne, Chris Willis and Deanne Coombs, and also Chris for speaking on the behalf of Ryan Peet this afternoon, for sharing the work of the Learner Evaluation Group. I've been reflecting throughout the talk this afternoon, and I really hope that the talk today, and particularly Geoff talking about the methodology which the Learner Evaluation Group used, encourages other colleagues across the GFM to conduct research in their classrooms. As Geoff said, we can then make sound decisions about our pedagogy, about learning and teaching, and many other aspects of being educationalists if we're coming from a research-informed perspective. So hugely grateful to the team today for sharing their own professional learning journey and sharing their own reflections. I've been made aware that the first part of the talk this afternoon might not have made itself to the live streamed, so I just want to go over some of the various bits and pieces from the introduction for today, and also just to outline the COVID safety measures that we've been following whilst the talk has been going on today. We have all been maintaining social distancing within this venue, and we have all been wearing a face covering when not speaking and when not on camera. So we have been adhering to the government guidelines throughout the talk this afternoon. If anybody does have any questions that they'd like to put to the presenters today, then please do complete the question submission form that was sent out earlier today, and the IOE will make sure that those questions are shared with the presenters to answer. All of the case studies from today in full will be shared with colleagues following this afternoon's talk, and they will also be published on the GFM website. And having looked at those myself, I would encourage you to have a read of those case studies. Finally, if any other colleagues would like to present at a future GFM talk, then please email your details, the title of your talk, and a brief overview of what you'd like to talk about to talks@gfmap.org, and we can arrange for you to talk at a future event. We'd love to hear from both teaching staff colleagues and classroom-based support staff colleagues, non-classroom-based support staff colleagues, any colleague across the GFM or the local area. We'd love to hear you talking at a future talk event. So all that's left for me to say is to say thank you very much for tuning in this evening. Stay safe, take care. Thank you all very much.